Have you ever looked back at a car you once dreamed of owning, only to realize it wasn't what you thought it would be? Imagine a car that had everyone talking in 1971, a vehicle so affordable, stylish, and promising that buyers rushed to dealerships with excitement. It was priced at just $3,000, making it seem like an unbeatable deal. But soon after, the same people who proudly drove it off the lot found themselves regretting their decision. What went wrong? By the time the dust settled, this car had gone from being one of the most desirable models of its time to one of the most disappointing. It's a classic example of how hype can sometimes blind even the most experienced buyers. And here's the interesting part: this wasn't just any car. It had a name that carried weight, a design that turned heads, and features that looked good on paper. Yet, beneath all that excitement, there were problems waiting to surface. Some mechanical, some financial, and some simply a result of changing times. Stick around until the end of this video, and you'll discover why this car became a cautionary tale in automotive history. You'll also find out how much it's worth today and whether collectors still see value in it or if it remains a forgotten failure. Now, let's go back to the early 1970s, a time when car culture was booming, fuel was cheap, and automakers were competing fiercely to capture the attention of buyers. In 1971, the average price of a new car was around $3,500, and gasoline was just 36 cents per gallon. Muscle cars were at their peak, European imports were gaining traction, and American manufacturers were rolling out models that promised both performance and affordability. But not everyone could afford a high-performance machine like the Chevrolet Camaro or the Ford Mustang. Many buyers wanted something practical yet stylish, something that looked good in the driveway without breaking the bank. That's exactly where this $3,000 car came in. It was marketed as a perfect blend of affordability, reliability, and modern design. For middle-class families, young professionals, and first-time car buyers, it seemed like a dream come true. The automaker behind this model had a strong reputation. They had already built cars that were known for their dependability and style. So when they introduced this new model, people expected the same level of quality. The advertisements were everywhere, promising great fuel efficiency, a smooth ride, and a car that was built to last. Dealerships were flooded with customers, and sales figures skyrocketed. In fact, some showrooms had waiting lists because demand was so high. But as time passed, owners started noticing things they hadn't expected. Some were minor annoyances: cheap interior materials, rattling noises, or uncomfortable seats. Others were more serious, like engine failures, transmission issues, and rust problems that showed up far too soon. The excitement of owning a brand new car quickly turned into frustration. Yet, during the first few months, the flaws weren't widely known. Many buyers were still in the honeymoon phase, enjoying their purchase and showing it off to friends and neighbors. But then came the real test: daily driving, long road trips, and harsh weather conditions. That's when the truth started to reveal itself. For many, the regret didn't happen overnight. It was a slow realization, one that came as repair bills piled up, resale values plummeted, and newer, better cars hit the market. By the mid-1970s, the car that once seemed like a brilliant purchase was now considered one of the biggest disappointments of its time. But why exactly did it fail? Was it just bad engineering, or was there more to the story? In the next section, we'll dive into the economic conditions of the early 1970s and the factors that made this car seem like such a great deal at first. Because sometimes the biggest mistakes happen not because we make bad choices, but because the world around us changes faster than we expect. Stay with us, because what happened next will surprise you. Back in 1971, $3,000 seemed like a fair price for a brand new car. For many middle-class families, it was a major purchase, but not an impossible one. Wages were steady, the economy was growing, and car ownership was seen as a necessity rather than a luxury. But what most buyers didn't realize was how quickly financial conditions could change, and how that change would turn their dream car into a financial burden. To understand why this $3,000 car felt like such a great deal at the time, we need to put things into perspective. The average house cost around $25,000, a gallon of gas was just 36 cents, and a loaf of bread was about 25 cents. Wages were rising, and most people felt optimistic about the future. Automakers took advantage of this confidence, pushing out models that promised affordability, reliability, and modern styling. For a car enthusiast in the early 1970s, the market was full of exciting options. But here's where things started to get tricky. While people were eager to buy new cars, they weren't paying close attention to what was happening behind the scenes. The economy was shifting in ways that most buyers didn't fully understand. Inflation was creeping up, the cost of living was rising, and international events were about to change everything. Those who bought this car in 1971 thought they were making a smart financial move, but within just a couple of years, that decision didn't look so wise anymore. One of the biggest reasons this car became a regrettable purchase was inflation. In the early 70s, the U.S. was coming out of a period of economic stability. Prices had been predictable for years, and people expected their money to hold its value. But by 1973, inflation had surged to nearly 7%, and by 1974, it was over 11%. Suddenly, the same $3,000 that bought a brand new car in 1971 didn't stretch nearly as far. Everyday expenses were climbing, wages weren't keeping up, and the cost of owning a car insurance, maintenance, and fuel became more of a financial strain than people had expected. And then came the real shock, the oil crisis of 1973. Up until then, most American cars were built with the assumption that gasoline would always be cheap and plentiful. Fuel efficiency wasn't a major concern, and buyers cared more about horsepower and style than miles per gallon. But when the oil-producing nations of the Middle East cut off supplies to the U.S., gas prices skyrocketed overnight. Long lines formed at gas stations, rationing was introduced, and for the first time, Americans had to think twice before taking a Sunday drive. For the owners of this $3,000 car, the situation went from bad to worse. What had once seemed like a practical, affordable vehicle now had a huge problem. It was a gas guzzler. When they bought it in 1971, fuel efficiency hadn't been a major selling point. But by 1974, as gas prices tripled, it became the single most important factor in car ownership. Buyers who had ignored fuel economy when making their purchase were now stuck with a car that cost a fortune to keep on the road. Meanwhile, car manufacturers were scrambling to adapt. Suddenly, smaller, more fuel-efficient cars from Japan and Europe were flooding the market, offering better gas mileage at a lower cost. Brands like Toyota, Datsun, now Nissan, and Volkswagen were gaining ground, and American buyers who had once looked down on these foreign imports were now desperate for a more economical alternative. At the same time, the resale market for the 1971 model collapsed. By the mid-70s, owners who wanted to sell their car found that nobody was willing to pay a decent price for it. A vehicle that had once been in high demand was now seen as an outdated, inefficient burden. Some owners were forced to take massive losses just to get rid of it, while others held on, hoping things would improve. But the economic situation didn't get better anytime soon. Inflation continued to rise, unemployment increased, and interest rates soared. For those who had financed their car purchase with a loan, monthly payments became a painful reminder of a decision they wished they could take back. By the late 1970s, the car was no longer a common sight on the roads. Some had been scrapped, Others were parked in garages, rarely driven because of fuel costs. What had started as a best-selling, high-demand vehicle had quickly become an example of how fast the market can change and how buyers can be left behind when they don't see it coming. For many, this car was their first real lesson in the unpredictability of car ownership. It wasn't just about how a car looked or how much horsepower it had. It was about long-term practicality, reliability, and adapting to economic shifts. Those who ignored these factors paid the price. But the biggest disappointments were yet to come. The problems with this car weren't just about fuel efficiency or inflation. Under the hood, there were mechanical flaws that made ownership even more frustrating. Issues that the manufacturers didn't advertise, but owners quickly discovered. And that's where things truly fell apart. By the early 1970s, the automobile industry was at its peak. American roads were filled with powerful muscle cars, elegant sedans, and stylish coupes. Owning a car wasn't just about transportation, it was a statement of status, personality, and lifestyle. Families took pride in their station wagons. Young drivers craved speed, and car makers were engaged in an intense battle to outshine each other. It was a golden era for car lovers, where new models came with bold designs, chrome accents, and engines that roared with authority. But it wasn't just about looks. The 1970S represented a shift in what people wanted from their vehicles. Power, size, and presence mattered. The bigger the car, the more impressive it seemed. Long hoods, massive bumpers, and wide-body designs were symbols of success. Automakers responded to this demand by rolling out cars that dominated the highways, machines that felt like rolling fortresses, with plush interiors and the kind of smooth ride that made even the longest road trips enjoyable. For the average American or European driver, owning a car was a major life milestone. It was more than just a machine, it was freedom. The ability to go anywhere, whenever you wanted, was something people didn't take for granted. Road trips were common, and families spent weekends exploring highways, stopping at roadside diners, and enjoying the open road. Gas was cheap, traffic was manageable, and there was little concern about fuel efficiency. But while muscle cars and luxury cruisers stole the spotlight, a different group of buyers had a more practical mindset. Not everyone could afford a high-performance vehicle, nor did they need one. Many people were looking for something simpler, a car that was affordable, reliable, and easy to maintain. For these buyers, flashy advertisements weren't enough. They wanted value. And that's exactly why this $3,000 car seemed like the perfect choice. In 1971, the automaker behind this car knew what buyers were looking for. They marketed it as an ideal blend of practicality and modern design. It was positioned as the smart choice, a car for those who wanted dependable transportation without unnecessary luxury. Advertisements painted a picture of reliability, economy, and long-term savings. And at a time when car culture was booming, many buyers saw this as an opportunity to own a brand new car without stretching their budget too far. It worked. People rushed to dealerships, eager to get behind the wheel of a vehicle that promised everything they needed at a price they could afford. The car was available in multiple trims, offering different levels of comfort and performance. For families, it was a sensible choice. For young professionals, it was a budget-friendly way to own a brand new vehicle. For retirees, it was an easy-to-drive, no-fuss machine that fit their need. At first, everything seemed great. The car looked good, the ride was smooth, and the price was unbeatable. But the reality of ownership turned out to be far different than what buyers expected. The driving experience wasn't as refined as the advertisement suggested. The car lacked the durability of its competitors. And while it seemed like a great deal at first, small problems began appearing sooner than expected. For many owners, the first warning signs were minor. A rattling noise here, a loose interior panel there, maybe a door that didn't close as solidly as it should have. These small issues were easy to ignore after all. It was a budget-friendly car. But over time, the problems became harder to overlook. Mechanical failures, poor build quality, and unexpected repair costs quickly overshadowed the excitement of owning a new car. Meanwhile, car culture was evolving. The cars that once symbolized American dominance on the roads were now facing competition from unexpected places. Japanese and European automakers were beginning to make their presence known. Brands like Toyota, Honda, and Volkswagen were introducing vehicles that offered better fuel economy, stronger reliability, and smarter engineering. At first, many American and European car buyers dismissed these imports, believing that their locally built vehicles were superior. But as more people started facing breakdowns, expensive repairs, and poor resale values, those foreign cars suddenly seemed more appealing. For the owners of this $3,000 car, reality set in. While the big muscle cars of the 60s and early 70s still had devoted fans, this budget-friendly model was quickly losing favor. It didn't have the charm of a classic cruiser, nor did it have the performance of a muscle car. It wasn't built for speed, and it wasn't built to last. It was simply built to sell. And once the hype died down, that became painfully clear. As the years passed, the once desirable car became a symbol of disappointment. Buyers, who had believed they were getting a reliable, cost-effective vehicle, found themselves dealing with frequent repairs, rust problems, and poor performance. The excitement of ownership turned into frustration, and by the mid-1970s, it was obvious that this car was not the wise investment people thought it would be. But the worst part? The real problems weren't just cosmetic. Under the hood, deeper issues were waiting to be discovered. And for many owners, those problems would turn what seemed like a bargain into a nightmare of mechanical failures and expensive repairs. At first, the problems with this car seemed small. A loose knob on the dashboard, a radio that didn't always work, maybe a door handle that felt a little flimsy. These were things most buyers ignored. After all, it was a budget-friendly car. No one expected perfection. But then, as the miles added up, the real issues began to show. One of the first things owners noticed was the engine's unpredictable behavior. It wasn't long before cold mornings became a nightmare. The engine would struggle to turn over, sometimes refusing to start at all. Some owners found themselves stuck in their driveways, waiting for the car to warm up, pressing the gas pedal repeatedly, hoping it would finally roar to life. Others had even worse luck, an engine that stalled in the middle of traffic, forcing them to restart in a panic while impatient drivers honked from behind. And when the engine did run, it wasn't smooth. The idle was rough, and acceleration felt sluggish. At a time when other cars on the road delivered power and excitement, this one felt like it was constantly fighting against itself. Mechanics would check it, adjust the carburetor, replace spark plugs, and make small tweaks, but the problems never truly disappeared. Some owners suspected it was just poor tuning. But over time, they realized the truth. The engine was simply underpowered and unreliable. Then came the overheating issues. Many drivers reported their temperature gauges creeping dangerously close to the red zone. Radiators boiled over, and clouds of steam poured from under the hood. Some blamed it on hot weather, but even in cooler temperatures, the problem persisted. Mechanics recommended flushing the radiator, replacing thermostats, or upgrading coolant. But the real issue was poor engineering. The cooling system wasn't designed to handle long-term stress, and as a result, breakdowns became an unfortunate part of ownership. And if the engine problems weren't bad enough, the transmission failures pushed owners over the edge. At first, shifting gears felt a little rough, nothing too alarming. But then the grinding started. The gears slipped, acceleration hesitated, and shifting became a guessing game. In automatic models, the transmission sometimes refused to engage properly, leaving drivers stuck in neutral when they needed to move. Manual transmissions weren't much better. Clutches wore out faster than expected, and gear linkages often felt loose and imprecise. These issues weren't just inconvenient, they were expensive. Repair costs began piling up quickly. Owners who thought they were saving money by buying an affordable car soon realized they were paying more in repairs than they had expected. Many regretted their decision, wishing they had spent a little extra on a car that didn't break down every few months. But the worst was yet to come. By the third or fourth year of ownership, many drivers noticed a new and terrifying problem: rust. At first, it was just a few small spots, tiny orange blemishes near the wheel wells or under the doors. Some owners ignored it, assuming it was normal wear and tear. But they quickly realized this wasn't just surface-level corrosion. The rust spread aggressively, eating away at the body, the frame, and even critical structural components.